Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's CJ Cup Byron Nelson. Gonna go over all things TPC Craig Ranch, get you guys ready for this week's venue in terms of the golf course setup, and go hole by hole, give you all the shots required around here, as well as our custom modeling and key stats for this week to help you identify some of your top plays. So by the end, you'll be an expert in all things for this track. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in with first off and look at some of the details for this week and what to expect from the renovation since last year. There have been quite a few changes to TPC Craig Ranch since we were here last year, and most notably some length added to the golf course. In fact, about 150 extra yards here in 2025, which has it a little bit over 7,500 yards. So an extremely long golf course, especially considering that it's only a par 71. You're also going to have new greens throughout the golf course by the next time we get here in 2026. So they're not completely done with the renovations, but most of them seem to be trying to make this a little bit more difficult. So you'll see that reflected with the scorecard yardage, a little bit longer than what you had the year before that. They've also added quite a few trees out here to the golf course and a few different tee locations to add different angles on certain holes. So partially that was to go out there and add some of that length, but they also wanted to bring in bunkers, water hazards a little bit more than what you had before. So in general, expect it to be a little bit tougher this time around, and perhaps some extra emphasis on that driving distance. But you still have bent grass greens, so you can see that over there in the turf grass section. And the rough this year is also a little bit beefier. So it's 3.25 inch ryegrass overseed, which is a lot longer than the 2.5 inch rough that we've had here the last few years. Green size is currently about the same as what it was before. Like I said, they haven't completely done the renovation yet, so that might change by the time that we get here next year. Bunkers, hazards, a lot of that really hasn't changed out there from year to year, but by the time we get here in 2026, some of that might end up changing. In terms of your averages over here, these should be pretty accurate here for this time around. The one thing I'll also note is that the fairways are also a little bit tighter this year. So last year you had about a 61% fairway rate. In fact, this is for the last 3 years around this golf course. It might be closer to like a 58 to 59% this time around, as most fairways are about 5 yards narrower than what they were before. But the green average, that likely isn't going to change very much. Just the weather, maybe receptiveness of the golf course, right, could skew that in one direction or the other. So if we get a lot of rain this week, you could expect it to be a little bit over that 70% mark that you've had for the last 3 years. If it's a drier, firmer, faster kind of week, then maybe it's down into the higher 60s out there with the green regulation rate. Scrambling percentage, usually really pretty high around this golf course. It's not one of the harder courses to get up and down around, but with some of the added length, some of the extra tee boxes, angles, that sort of thing, I do think the ball striking could be a little bit harder. So you already mentioned the slightly lower fairway percentage because of the narrow landing areas, but also potentially a slightly lower green regulation rate because you're hitting longer irons into the greens. But outside of that, this is normally a very easy golf course, perhaps why they're trying to make it a little bit harder. Over 4.4 birdies per round. Then the bogey average you can see is less than 2 per round over there. So both averages significantly easier than what we're used to seeing. So last year's when you had Taylor Pendrith win, you could see Ben Coles finished in second, one shot back. Year before that is when J-Day had his resurgence back into the winner's circle. So the runner-up that year was Austin Eckroat, who of course ended up winning at the Cognizant a few months later down here in South Florida. But this golf course with that added length, it was about an average golf course off the tee before. You didn't really have to be super long off the tee, but now that it's going to be beefier, could be a little bit harder with some of the renovations next year, I think it's going to become a little bit more of a bomber's paradise. So as of right now, you don't really have to be a bomber. You don't have to be somebody that's more precise either. It's pretty balanced, but we'll have to see if that changes here this year. Your approach distribution, though, was already extremely long. You usually have closer to 4, maybe even 5 shots here from 50 to 125. You can see there, it's just about 2.5 per round here at this golf course last year. So you can see these middle two ranges, so this 125 to 175 range, also this 176 to 225 range, are utilized a lot more than usual. And, you know, it's maybe like an extra shot and a half from this 125 to 175 range, but this 175 to 225 range, it's maybe an extra 2.5 shots that you're getting there per round. And now that they're adding 150 yards to the course, it's going to be even more so skewed towards that direction. So I would say that there's going to be even less shots from 50 to 125, maybe even a hair less from this 125 to 175, and expect there to be a little bit of a boost here with these bottom two buckets, but this 225 plus range perhaps even being close to 4.5 per round. So it's definitely a longer golf course now. That's why I think the bomber's paradise might come into play a little bit more, because with some 500 plus yard par fours, you know, hitting the ball 300 to 325 yards off the tee is going to be a massive advantage on those sort of holes. So, you know, some some of those changes, we don't really know exactly what to expect ahead of time, but that's kind of what I'm thinking when it comes to the changes this year. Around the green, it's a very balanced golf course. You're going to get lies from pretty much every single type of lie that you can think of. So you even have fringes out there, bunkers, rough, fairway cuts. You're going to have everything around this sort of golf course. And then the putting percentages are about tour average, I would say. You can see here that maybe you make slightly more putts around here than your average tour course, which makes sense with the high scrambling rate, also the high birdie rates and low bogey rates that you have around here. The ball just tends to go in the hole here a little bit more than most golf courses, and partially could be the greens. Maybe that's why they're also renovating them after this year, but usually a low score, something in that 20 to 25 under par range that's winning here. This year, I have to think it's closer to like a 17 to 20 under par, mostly because of that added length of the golf course and them strategically making it a little bit harder this year. Now let's quickly take a look at the holes and the kind of shots required around here. So first off, we got hole number 1, a little bit of a handshake as it's a shorter par 4. Most players going to take less than driver off the tee. In fact, if you took driver, you'd be absolutely batshit crazy over here at hole number 1. They can leave you a scoring club in, maybe a pitching wedge at the very most for players, a 9-iron if you decided to hit an iron off the tee, that sort of thing. But either way, something that you have to take advantage of, because right off the bat, you're going to get hard holes like 2 here that are close to 480 yards. So if it plays into the wind like it can at times, a lot of times the wind will go to the north, which is directly into the wind here. You could be looking at a bogey here at hole 2. So that's why it's nice to get a birdie there at hole number 1, just in case you get into some trouble there at 2. Hole 3 is a shorter, more positional par 4, one where you also have to lay up off the tee. So kind of like one, you'd be crazy to hit a driver here just because there's no room if you choose to do so. Hole 4 is your first par 3. Almost all of them are going to be over 200 yards. They might move up the tee box or 2 from round to round to make one or the 4 shorter, but they've all got some length to them if they go out there and play it to their furthest extent. Next up, you have 5, which is your first par 5. This one is reachable in 2 for pretty much the entire field if you hit the fairway, but if you hit it in these bunkers to the right, could be a little bit of an issue. Also, to the trees to the left could block you out. And you can see over here, this little bit of a natural area just past the bunkers, so even your longer players are going to have to keep it really accurate to be able to go for this in 2. So hole 6 is 360. They can make this one drivable off the tee. It does require them to move up the tee box to really give players a go for it off the tee, but even as is, it is a short positional par 4 where you're going to see a lot of birdies there. Hole 7 is another par 3 over 200 yards. This one is 233 out there to the center, so especially like a back left or a back right pin, those can be among the most difficult on the entire course. Hole 8 is 485, so this is a straightaway par 4, but one with quite a bit of length to it. Not a bunch of trees off the tee, so unless you get really unlucky behind, a branch, a trunk, that sort of thing, you're probably going to still be able to go for this green in 2, but definitely one that's more of a par and get out of there sort of hole. And then finally, 9 is a finishing par 5 on the front. This one is reachable in 2 by the entire field if you go out there and hit the short stuff, but you just don't want to miss over here to the right side. The bunker is an obvious no-go, is going to force you to lay up in most circumstances. And then even if you're in the rough here to the right, these overhanging trees and branches make it really difficult to go directly for the green. So if you're over here, you may be laying up just to the short left of this green complex, but if you put it in the fairway, it is all bombs away, probably about 200 yards or less in, which is easily reachable for these tour players. Now, if you're starting on the back, you don't have nearly the same kind of handshake that you had at 1. So hole number 10 is nearly 480 yards. Also can play into the wind. This one is normally downwind, but like hole number 2, right? If 2 ends up being downwind instead of into the wind, this one then becomes the brute that you have. So whether you're starting on 1 or you're starting over there on that back 9, you're going to have difficult holes right off the bat, which is why it's so important to take advantage of the scoreable ones when you get them, which 11 wouldn't qualify as that. This one is nearly 460. It's not one of the harder holes that you have out here, but certainly not a pitch and putt par 4. Hole 12 is a par 5, normally at least out there for your members. This will be a par 4 this week. So if you're starting on the back, you're really going to get hit with the hard holes early. Now they're going to play this one shorter, so your tour players probably looking at a target more so to where I have it here, which says 327, but with the shortened tee box is probably closer to a 300-yard drive, but it will still leave you an extremely long shot in. In fact, if you put the second shot out there on the green, it's still over a 200-yard approach from that point. So it's one of the harder holes that you have out there, which you'd expect for a converted par 5. 13 is 501 yards, so another really difficult hole. If you can't tell, the backside is an absolute brute here. 14 is 333 yards, so this is a drivable par 4. Even if they don't move up the tee box, this one is potentially drivable, a lot depending on that wind direction. If it plays into the trade wind, which is normally towards the north, it's not as reachable, but any sort of other wind in almost the entire field will be trying to get it up near the green complex. 15 is 216, so this is a longer par 3. Also have that water down the left side there. 16, 493, so another one of these beefy long par 4s. This is no way to hide out here, right? If you're hitting terrible tee shots, you're not getting it over 300 yards. You're going to be making bogeys all day. 17 is 172, so this is the shortest of all the par 3s. It is the one that's under 200 yards, but it's still very tricky because of how difficult the green complex is. And then finally, 18 is a finishing par 5. This one is also reachable in 2 by a majority of the field, but a little bit of water in front of the green complex makes you have to think about it a bit. It's kind of like 14 at Augusta National, a few of the other par 5 setups where it's that really narrow green complex and that water in front. So it's a decision that you have to make based on the tee shot that you hit. But if you've got to make an eagle to go out there and make up 2 shots to win, then a lot of players are going to go for it, which adds a little bit of drama out there to the end of this event. And I can't really remember any like epic eagles to go out there and steal the golf tournament or anything, but I'm sure at some point we'll probably see it here, hole number 18. So a fun little finishing hole. I love the finishing par 5s out there on tour, especially when they have that risk reward aspect to it. And now that we've seen the course, let's go through our key stats and comps for this week that I'm using to identify my top plays. So over here, we've got the bet the number model up over here for the Byron Nelson this week. And what you can see on here is the different stats that they're using to identify plays. First 4 over here are going to be your core 4 shots gained metrics. Those are always going to be included in the bet the number model. And then of course, 3 niche stats on top of that. They're going to give us a really good idea for what to expect this specific week. So you can see over here, the core 4 are included. I will say that the shots gained off the tee and approach are weighed a little bit more than what you have with these short game categories, which is almost always going to be the case there with the bet the number model. Ball striking stats are the most consistent part of golf, the kind of stats that are also the most consistent out there from round to round. So that's why when we're looking at showdown stats, that's the main thing we're looking at over there with those 2 categories, and then also in our golf handicapping process in general. So that is the case this week. I can't give you guys the exact numbers, as you've got to keep some of that behind the propriety paywall over there at the bet the number site. Of course, guys, you can join over there to see exactly where they're putting all of their model weightings and to adjust them yourself so that you can get exactly what you want out there in your model. So those 4 probably shouldn't surprise you. What we're really going to focus on here, though, are going to be these 3 stats to the right. So first off, you've got putting from 8 to 15 feet, which if you go back to the course tab from before, over there, if you're a member over here and bet the number, you'll see that in those 8 to 15 foot range there, that there's a little bit more make rate than most out there on tour. And if you're a really good putter, guys like Jason Day, for example, Gsluke just absolutely lit it up on the greens around TPC Craig Ranch when he went back-to-back winner around here. This is where they did a lot of that damage. So if you take a look at that proximity bucket, guys like Frankie Sapin stand out. Brian Campbell, of course, are already a winner out there in the PGA Tour this year. But all these guys that are dark green here, and you can see Pendrith right towards the top end of that list, obviously has had some success around this golf course with the win out there last year, are guys that you might want to boost up a little bit. And I like that they're looking at birdie or better percentage. This is a golf course with a winning score, typically in that 20 to 25 under par range. So you have to have the kind of firepower to get to that kind of winning score. So I like the fact that they're looking for guys that can light it up with the birdies. So guys like Cam Davis, Nicholas Norgard-Moeller, Trace Crow, Scotty Scheffler, of course. He's always going to be towards the top of that birdie or better percentage list. We're also going to get a pretty decent bump out there in the bet the number modeling. So if you can pair that up with some pretty decent putting out there from 8 to 15 feet, then you could be really cooking out there. So for example, Dylan Wu checks both boxes. Jacob Bridgman's been at least better than average over there from 8 to 15 feet. Also good to see that he's been making a whole lot of birdies. Guys like Sam Burns also fitting the bucket out there from the putting perspective. And then the last thing they have over here is approach from 175 to 250, which is especially important around this golf course to begin with. I already showed you before, what is it, like 6 to 7 shots that were coming from that range. But when you add the 150 yards to the golf course, there's going to be even more long irons around this sort of track. And we couldn't really even see that with the hole by hole breakdown, right? They don't have it completely accounted for quite yet, but there's going to be a ton of shots out here with these proximity buckets. So, if you want to narrow down on anything when it comes to the iron play, it's these specific kind of buckets. And I know Bet the Number left it off with just these 7 metrics there, but I'm going to be looking at some bent grass putting stats on a golf course like this. I'm going to be taking a look at some driving distance stuff because I do think that's going to play a little bit longer with some of the changes that they've made. But these are the kind of key stats that you should be considering in your analysis to try and narrow down, find players that are good for this specific kind of event, because every golf course is different, right? They're not all going to go out there and play the same. Not to say that just because somebody's at the top end of the Bet the Number model means that they're going to go out there and 100% find some success. But if you're comparing 2 players, you're trying to choose between 2 of them for your betting card, or maybe out there for your DFS lineups, that sort of thing, and one is grading out very well in the model, and one is towards the middle, maybe the below, bottom half, that sort of thing out there in your model, then take the guy that's towards the top, right? If you truly are even on those sort of players, you can't make that kind of decision, but your decision-making process doesn't have to start with the model at the same time, right? It's a tool to go out there and use for success for any given event, but it's also not the end-all be-all, so keep that in mind as well. That being said, though, do want to show you guys the top of this model this week. So Joseph Bramlett, a surprise name, at least for me, over there at number 1. Trace Crow at 2. You have Alejandro Tosti down there at number 3. A lot of high birdie percentage players that we've seen playing in like weaker field events. So I think this is partially the sample size with these kind of players. A lot of these guys have really only been playing in like alternate field events, not the Masters, not playing in events like signature events at like the API, right? That have much harder golf courses. I want to see guys that have been playing in like every single event. So Scotty Scheffler is like the first like legit player that, at least in my opinion, that we see on this list. Siwoo Kim would be the second one down there at 12, and I've got to say Siwoo Kim is an intriguing fit around this sort of golf course. He went 13th last year, second the year before that, so maybe the kind of guy that I'll be keeping an eye on. But these guys like Pendrith that we know are also playing in those big time events, Ben Griffin even, right? He's playing in a lot of those signature level sort of events. Those are the kind of players that I'd personally be putting the most kind of stock into. Not to say that guys like Bramlett, Crow, Toasty, Zhang can't get there in their own kind of way, especially down in that 6K range when it comes to the DraftKings pricing, but keep that in mind when it comes to these models. And that's also why I like to give that little bit of an asterisk when it comes to the stats, right? It's not always the end all be all, because the stats are coming from different events oftentimes, and that's exactly what you're getting with some of these guys popping up there in the top 5 of this modeling, which is why you have to have a little bit more nuance in my opinion when you're going out there and doing this sort of thing. So the modeling can help, especially with trying to find some of those lower 6K guys to go out there and throw into lineups, but especially these guys like Scotty, Siwoo Kim that have been playing in those top tier events are the ones that are far more impressive in my opinion. In terms of comp courses, I've got 3 that really stick out. First off is going to be another Texas event, so this is over there with the Houston Open, and that's Memorial Park Golf Course, which is going to play a lot harder than I think what we're going to have this week, but with them adding some length, trying to make it a little bit more strategic around here, maybe it does play a little bit more difficult and more like what you have at the Houston Open. This year, of course, is when Min Woo Lee went out there and won, but this is a golf course where it's not overly hard, but it has enough to trip you up, enough long iron shots around the Houston Open to where you're not going to see like 30 under par winning the thing. So if you take a look at this year's leaderboard, you can try and find some leaderboard crossover, but the last 2, even 3 years before that, not a bad idea to take a look at the Houston Open. And next up, we've got the Shriners Children's Open, another shorter TPC track where it's a shorter track than what you're going to have this week, but it's the same kind of scoring as what you're going to have. And around the Shriners Children's Open, you also have a lot of longer par 3s that are the same kind of thing as what you're going to get this week. So not the perfect fit, especially after some of the changes that you've had to the golf course, but the last few years, Shriners has been a comp course that I've looked at, and it's helped me get on to some of my top plays out there the last few years. So I don't think it's my favorite comp course now that we're here in 2025, but still something I'll throw out there because you can see Pendrith ready to top 10 finish there. KH Lee, multiple time champion around this golf course, right? He had a top 5 finish there in 2024, and right, that's not even when he's been in the best kind of form. So that's why I still think it's valuable, right? You have enough of these guys that have shown up at different golf courses to go out there and want to play them. And if you go to the year before that, like Pendrith finished top 3 that year, right? So I don't know if it's that like mind-blowing that he went out there and also won at a golf course like this, because they emphasize a lot of the same kind of things with the shots gained. And then the last one I have over here is going to be the Sanderson Farms Championship. That's the Country Club of Jackson out there with the comp. It's about the same length. It is a par 72 though, as opposed to the par 71. And kind of like the last comp over there with TPC Summerlin, I liked it a little bit more before they added all that kind of length, but we don't know how the golf course is going to play this year. This is our first time going out out there and seeing it. So some of these guys that finished in the top 5, top 10 the last time we saw it in 2024 could be worth a few extra looks. The year before that is when Luke List went out there and won. So look, Bombers can still get the job done around there, right? List won it. You had Aubert finishing in second. He, of course, is one of the longest players that we have out there on tour, but also a lot of these shorter guys going out there and mixing in as well. So whether it's the custom modeling, the key stats that we mentioned before, throwing in some comp course history as well, that's what I'm using to identify some of my top plays. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also go ahead and comment down below what you've got as the winning score for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. Over there is where I'm posting all my modeling, all my projections for the week, also all my stuff on Draftkings and Underdog and Prize Picks that I'm entering to give you guys a good idea of my exposure for any given event. I also got my outright bets, placement stuff over there as well. So for all of that extra information, make sure to give me your winning score prediction down below. It's going to be on a first come, first serve basis. So go ahead, claim your player before anyone else goes out there and steals them. And if you get the exact winning score, you'll win a free month access right there. Nothing else you have to go out there and do. So best of luck out there with the giveaway. Best of luck with all of your exposure as well. Whether it's over there, the large field GPPs last week went super well over there for DFS. Ended up taking down the $33 single entry. Second place in the big $5 lottery. So it was quite a week over there for the bankroll. Over a 14K profit. Never hurts, especially for a quote unquote off week, like a lot of people would say. But let's try and build on that over there for this week. So hope to see you guys out there towards the top end of those GPPs. And of course, best of luck with all your outright betting exposure and all the prop stuff that you're doing as well. But for the rest of the week, we're gonna have plenty of content to come. So make sure you subscribe so you guys don't miss any of that to come as well. That'll include our Wednesday live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern time, going over any of your questions down there in the chat. I'll have a link down below to that as well, so you can set a reminder for that over there on Wednesday. We're gonna go through a weather report, some ownership before lock, some game theory, also some lineups, some of the different contests available over there in DraftKings, then also the Underdog and Prize Pick side. So you won't want to miss that. Subscribe so you guys don't miss that when it goes live, as well as our DFS and betting preview, which will be dropping on a little bit later on this evening. But I'm looking forward to it. Should be a fun week. Glad to be back to some quote unquote regular golf this week, right? Not some team stuff. Just kind of throws everything out of whack. But hey, the team stuff treated us nicely, so I don't know if I should be complaining about it all that much, with it being one of my best DFS weeks of the year. But let's run it back, keep that momentum going, and I'll see you guys for the rest of the stuff this week.